I am Dave Byers. I'm a senior field technologist at Haiku. Haiku, if you do not know, we've existed since 2018. We've got a Series B funding as of last year. We are a data protection company. So if you think of some of the typical backup vendors like Commvault, Veeam, Cohesity, Rubrik, and so on. However, we have a fresh take on it since we came at this from a different angle and starting at 2018. We took a fresh approach to data protection. So we're 100% agentless. We protect workloads. We also do data protection on-prem. We do hybrid solutions, cloud data protection. And most recently, this past quarter, we also released a SaaS application protection. So if you think about the SaaS environment in public clouds, there's like 17,000 different SaaS vendors in the marketplace today. Now, most SaaS vendors will tell you, we will protect the application, but it's your data, you protect that data. So we now have an API which we can code up against. It's a low code, no code environment, and we can now code to protect those SaaS applications. And right now we've got a marketplace, and I think the marketplace right now has maybe 30 different SaaS vendors. Right now we're at a clip about adding maybe 10 new SaaS vendors every month. And they're the most popular ones that most people use. And if you think of like Salesforce, that's one of the big ones that people use. So that is something we actually protect in the SaaS environment. And we do granular recovery of that data. And that's, I think, what a lot of people struggle with is they lose data. How do they recover granularly that data? Think about Okta. That's something else that we protect as well, but we have that granular restoration. Now, with that being said, we've also done something else. When I came to Haiku 2.5 years ago, one of the things my CTO had asked me to do was to help develop some kind of an assessment where we can actually determine how a company can recover from a ransomware event. Now, it's great to see that we have these really cool tools for the discovery of any kind of nuances in the environment or malware that might occur in the environment. And it's great that we have those tools in place. But what we were concerned with at Haiku is we want to see, well, how prepared are you to recover from an event if they actually did penetrate those defenses? So with that being said, let's take a look at ransomware today. Now, I've been in the IT industry a long time. Obviously, you can see by the color of my hair. I'm not a young person. I've been in the industry for a long time, since 1995. When I was first in the IT sector as an administrator, we were really worried about retrieving data for someone that might have deleted something, or it might have been an outage, or it might have been a partial disaster. I live here in the Houston area, so we have to worry every fall and summer that the hurricanes are coming through. So we want to make sure we're prepared to recover from those data losses. Now, today, it's more about cybersecurity. We're seeing more threats than we ever have, and they're not going to slow down whatsoever, especially with the advent of artificial intelligence. So we see the rapid development of this. You look at the dark web and the things that you can actually pick up and purchase and buy to actually help people develop code, and even getting like rootkits or purchasing malware as a service, or getting rootkits they can actually download and deploy. So it's really scary, the things that are actually occurring today. So our really focus was, when a threat actually happens, they typically go after that critical data. Now, with that critical data, they're also looking at the data protection environment that people are currently using. So whether it be the Rubriks and Cohesities and Commvault, Veeam, and even Haiku, the one thing they're going to try and target most off is going to be that data protection environment, because they want to see if they can affect that in any particular way, because the only way they're going to get paid that ransom is if they can actually not have the person restore their data and block it. So what I want to do is I want to develop some kind of a tool we can ask numerous questions, and those questions would actually be an assessment. And that assessment's going to leave you with, it's almost like a FICO-like score. So the higher the score, the better protected you are to recover from a ransomware event, and obviously the lower the score. Now, we have some insurance companies who are actually looking at cyber insurance companies to actually utilizing this tool as their assessment to assess ways in which they can get people better premiums if they score higher. Now, obviously, if they score lower, the premiums are going to be higher. Now, the benefit for the end user is now they've got a baseline, they've got something to work towards to improve that environment. And I'm not talking about like prevention detection tools, but I'm also looking at things in which is process related. So it's great to have tools, but if you don't have your processes aren't working properly, you're still not going to be able to recover. So let me
Hey,
back up.
Dave.
Yep.
Dave, I just want to share with you one story.
Yep.
I got an email from someone on the dark web who had heard about Angelbeat, asked me to organize a series of webinars for cyber criminals. No, this is no BS, called Devil Beats, where the providers of ransomware as a service could use not Angelbeat, but Devil Beat to market their solutions to cyber criminals across the world. So it's a pretty dark place out there, which is why you need solutions like Haiku.
Exactly. And so I'm going to go into some of these slides deeper. So I've got six different slides that are really good to, when I do these assessments, it actually puts, I wouldn't say the fear into people so much, but it kind of opens their eyes going, oh my gosh, I had no idea that I should be doing this, this, and this. And like I said, some of this is process related. So when I talk to MSPs and CSPs that want to eat their own dog food because they provide services for their customers, they better protect their own environment because they're protecting other people's environments. So, how does it feel to be under a ransomware attack? Well, the first thing you're going to have people do is panic, right? So if I don't get my processes right, my documentation is not there, it doesn't exist, or it's not up to date, both on my disaster recovery process, but also the incident response plans, which have to deal with cyber threats when they do come through. There's major worry that they're not going to be able to recover. And when we talk about the threat actors, let's be real here. They're criminals. They really are. And even if you pay them, there's no guarantee you're going to get your money's worth and get those decryption keys to get your data back. They're criminals. I would even go as far to say that maybe 50% of the time they pay the ransom, that the other 50%, you don't get your data at all. Or if you do get some of the data, it's only some of that data and it's not all of your data back. And who are you going to complain to? It's a criminal. So how can you fight ransomware? So I broke this down into 6 basic categories: detection, prevention. Those are things that Martin, Tracy, and Mark had talked about, which is, like I said, is a great segue in what I'm going to be talking about, because at Haiku, we don't really do the detection prevention. We want people to do detection prevention. When I do these assessments and I ask a lot of these questions, I do talk about what they currently do today and how they leverage these tools. Now, in the event they do get through, we want to make sure we have tools we can actually do a quick recovery to get that data back. So there's different things that we'll talk on all of these 6 different categories. So let's talk about the ransomware protection layer 1. So with Haiku, we've got proactive alerts on backup anomalies. So just like we have on production workloads, the tools that Martin, Tracy, and Mark had talked about, we too, as Haiku, want to make sure that we see anything that looks unusual. So if it's a backup job that normally runs and it takes us 10 minutes to run that backup job, if for some reason it's running longer or we see a higher CPU load, we're going to allow or have an alert that comes through to let us know there's a backup anomaly that's actually occurring. And just like Tracy talked about too, role-based security with the different layers of protection. We too, when we talk about backup environments, we want to make sure that we have very secure ways in which only the people who are part of that backup application can only access that backup application. So we too want to be as strict as possible, only allowing those people who have access to the backup application or backup applications only should have those rights to access that. Also, the storage layers that we talk about. So whether it be my snapshots or backups or my archives, if they're on-site, off-site, in the cloud, in a disaster recovery facility, we want to make sure only those people who should have access really do have access to those. I sometimes even challenge people. I said, well, are your backups part of your production network? If I'm on the production network, can I ping the backup server? Can I ping my storage that I'm writing my backups to? Can I ping that storage that's out in the cloud from production? So I truly want to have like a segregation of network, even just to make sure I'm really secure. So if someone happens to be on my production network, it's a hacker, I want to try and make it as difficult as possible to get to my backups, because like I said, that's going to be one of the first things they're going to try to attack is your backups and disable them at all costs. The other thing that and this is kind of a funny story, many years ago when I worked for one of our competitors, I had, as a system engineer, I had one of the companies call me and say, I only have 1 day's worth of backup and I should have 90. You know, can you come and take a look at it? So I said, sure, I'll come and take a look. Well, what I had found out is they had a junior admin who was playing in their production environment on their production backup server, which they shouldn't have been, obviously, because when this person was playing with the backup environment, he was in the policies and made a policy change from 90 days to 1 day. Instead of hitting cancel, he accidentally hit save and didn't realize it. Well, he was new. So what we want to do too is, even though we have to worry about external threats, we also have to worry about internal, sometimes they are threats, but things that people might do accidentally. So we also have expiration prevention. So someone just can't go in there accidentally and change a policy. And obviously, part of the process control is going through a change management process. And part of that is, if I'm going to make a change to a policy in a backup job, it has to be approved by a number of people. So the one thing we don't want to do in our software, we want to make sure we have an expiration prevention. So we want to lock it down so there's no accidental changes of policies. The second layer of ransomware protection is layer 2. So the other thing that Haiku has done too is, unlike some of the legacy providers where you have a thick client that runs either on a physical server or virtual server, we wanted to build something that was in a software as a service solution. So it can run on a physical, it can run on a virtual. If it's a virtual server, it's a very lightweight Linux server that is a locked down server. But we can also run it as a service in the cloud, in any of the public clouds. And then also we want to provide a way in which when we do upgrades, and when I worked for one of the other competitors, upgrades for them was pretty difficult too, because they not only had to affect their backup server and make sure that it gets upgraded, their media servers, media agents, but they also have agents either on physical servers, virtual servers, if it's application based, or also in the cloud. So to do the upgrades, you had to follow a specific process to get everything upgraded to the same code level. With Haiku, because we're such a lightweight client, the way that we do our upgrades, it's very simple, very easy. It happens behind the scenes and you don't have to worry about it. So you set it and forget it. The ransomware protection layer 3. I can't tell you the number of times I've asked organizations, what is your protection model? Oh, we've got a hardware that does hardware-based snapshots, and that's all we would need. We're good. And I'm like, well, you know what? That's really good to have snapshots, but you need to have a multi-layered approach when you're protecting data. So snapshots might be good for, having a file deleted today, and I can go back to yesterday's snapshot and pull that file back out. It might be good for some disaster recovery scenarios, some minor outages. But when we talk about ransomware threats, snapshots are really bad. Can I even trust it? Can I get to those snapshots? Is there malware that has been infected on top of those snapshots? What about my backups? So backups are really good for my disaster recovery scenarios, but more than likely when I talk about incident response and cyber threats, I will have to go back to a backup. And then when I talk about my backups, I now have to do find the point in time that I can go back to that latest snapshot before. So I have to now rely upon forensics on my production environment to find out the who, what, when, where, and how, so I can actually do a recovery from the latest known good backup. The other thing too is if you're doing any kind of archives, for those organizations who require more than 30 days, 90 days, a year, 7 years, then we have to look at maybe archiving the data off into the cloud for longer term storage that tends to be less expensive. Some organizations still might have hot, cold, warm data centers they can push data to. What I'm seeing more and more is people looking at the cloud and offsetting a lot of that data into the cloud. And with that, we talk about air-gapped immutable storage. So I came from the day of tape before we had disk to disk. So that kind of tells you how old I am. We want to make sure that we push data out is going to be an unreadable, unchanged backup data. That is going to be highly important. So we had 2 scenarios. I had a healthcare company, and then I also had an MSP that actually had a ransomware event occur in both of those locations. They were using Haiku. They were using immutable storage. So when that data gets written to that immutable storage, there's no way a hacker can actually go in there and take that data and modify it and change it, encrypt it. So that is going to be one of the last lines of defenses, is moving that data into some kind of immutable storage. And I talked a little bit about this before too, but when we have that dedicated storage, if it's on-prem for short-term snapshots, short-term backups, it's okay to have it on-prem. But the one thing we want people to do is to get off into another location, or if it's a hardware device that's on-prem, as long as that hardware hard device supports immutability or worm. That is a great place to keep the data too. I talk about having a dedicated network specifically for the backups that's segregated away from my production environment. I also want to make sure that I'm very secure as far as what credentials people actually have. And then I talk a lot about process control. How often do I look at those people who are moving from one role to a different role within that organization? And am I actually looking at those roles and change the role by security based upon the new job they now have? Plan B, sufficient backups. This is a really interesting feature that Haiku has, is that as a new VM or a physical server gets implemented, or if it's in the cloud, we automatically detect what type of server that is, and we can drop it into the appropriate backup policy. And as far as applications go, we're also application aware. So we know what application that is, and we can deploy it towards the right policy for that specific application, whether it be Oracle, SQL, DB2, or whatever it might be. Production layer 5. So this is the process piece. So though it's great that people have detection tools, they might be using artificial intelligence, third-party tools that Martin, Tracy, and Mark also have access to. I want to talk a lot about process. So when I go through these assessments, we talk a lot about, let's talk about testing. How often do you perform your testing? Do you do validation and verification testing when you're trying to recover data? So if we say that your data is now encrypted, can I get back to that immutable storage target, recover that data, and then test? I might have a sandbox area that I can actually test too. And with that is all the documentation that goes with it. Now, you may or may not be surprised, but the number of people that I've spoken to say, well, I do have my disaster recovery plans, and yes, I do test them. I might, the really good people test them every quarter, but I'm satisfied if people test them out once a year. When I talk about documentation, I'm not like, listen, if you're doing documentation, if it's on a test, like a yearly test or quarterly test, but we also need to take a look at any kind of major infrastructure changes that you make within the environment. So as you make those changes, make sure you update your documentation. Lastly is the incident response. I would say 7 out of 10 people I talk to either do not know what incident response is, or they've heard of it, but they don't use it, or it's not documented. And they just say, well, I know what my core infrastructure looks like, my tier 1 applications, I know how to restore that, but they are not. So when a ransomware event actually occurs, that is where people kind of get freaked out. They're like, oh my gosh, I don't have anything really documented. I've got to go off the top of my head and shoot from the hip when I'm trying to do recovery. So for me, processes are paramount. You have to have good processes in place. They have to be documented. They have to be tested. The last layer is the layer 6. So I call the first one is RTO. So recovery time objective assurance. Within Haiku, we actually can deploy RTOs on all of my policies. So I have a recovery objective for one of my policies that has to be getting a SQL database up and running within an hour of it going down. I actually can deploy a policy that says the RTO is going to be 1 hour. So when I practice my recovery for that SQL server, I now have reports can actually show me how well I'm doing as far as RTOs. So when you do practice this in a sandboxed area, you practice it once a month, once a quarter, or once a year. You want to make sure that you're hitting those RTOs that have been agreed upon between the backup administrators and the business owners. Automated backup validation. So I know when I talk to people about validation and verification, they're like, well, it takes a lot of time. So we want to make sure we can build in policies that are automated backup validation that actually test it. So not only is that server pingable and I can see it and it's running and it's turned on, I want to verify that application that might be dependent upon a SQL server or an Oracle server that is up and running, and making sure the application can actually talk to that Oracle server. So we have ways in which we can actually do the automatic backup validation against things like that to make it easier for people to perform these tests. Multi-cloud disaster recovery. Because we're now getting a bigger footprint into the cloud, we also realize a lot of people are trying to move from on-prem into the cloud. We have easy ways to take that data and do a migration from on-prem into the cloud. And then also, if people want to have a multi-cloud approach, if they really don't trust their AWS environment, they say, well, let's go ahead and have Azure as my backup, and I want to perform DR in my Azure environment. How is that done? So we now also have multi-cloud disaster recovery that we can do as well. So Wouldn't it be great to know how fit you are to fight a ransomware event? So this
Hey,
is what,
Dave,
yep,
Dave, we're just about out of time. So if you could try and summarize, that would be great.
I'm right there. This is
Okay.
it. So we have our score. This is the tool that I actually helped develop with Boston College, Mandiant, FireEye, SADA, and Carahsoft. So we didn't do this alone. This is all really based off of the NIST standards. If you look at the lower right, getourscore.org, if you want to take a screenshot of that or write that down, this is what I would call the minimalist version of our score. It's about 23 questions, 5 categories. It will kind of give you an idea of what we would actually do when we talk about the in-depth consultation. And who can do that? Well, I can certainly help. I've done a number of these myself, so you can just reach out to me. Ron, you're going to make this slide deck available to everybody on this call, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so on slide number 1, my contact information is there, david.byers@haiku.com. If you guys want to do anything with a more advanced consultation, there's no cost involved in whatsoever. It takes about 2 hours to actually get through the 100 questions over 5 categories. We also have partners throughout the United States. Partners are certified to do these assessments, and they can, as well as myself, do these assessments for you. So basically, Haiku's on a mission to make the world a safer place by ensuring businesses have intuitive, accessible ways to protect critical data wherever it resides. So we are here to protect your data. We are not a legacy provider that was, built back in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. This is something that was built as late as 2018. Our goal is to make sure you can recover in the event of a ransomware event. And I think with the R score, that's going to give you a really good way to assess how prepared you are to recover from a threat. And that's all I had.